It is my honor now to call up longtime congregant Rita Sherman for a Devar Torah, a teaching about this week's Torah portion and Jewish connections across borders and generations. Thank you, Rita.
Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. We were in Duffy Whole Foods in Machynlleth. We'd arrived back in Wales the day before, having left New York the day after Donald Trump was elected for a second term, and now we had to get provisions. My husband, Jeffrey Seward, was getting cereal and olive oil and balsamic vinegar and I don't know what else. I was getting fruits and vegetables. As I shopped, a man off a bit to the side behind me pulled something out of the refrigerator case there and announced, "This is really good vegetarian haggis, and I should know. I'm a Scotsman." I actually couldn't care less about vegetarian haggis. Really. In any case, he and I started talking. After a while, I asked him what kind of work he does. He told me he runs his wife's art business, adding, "It's a job." For some reason I have yet to understand, I told this complete stranger that there's a difference between a job and work. Adding for good measure, and the word for work in Hebrew is the same as the word for worship. "That was interesting," he said to me, telling me his father was a pastor. Then he asked me if I knew the antique store across the way, and I said yes, I did. He told me he'd just seen a beautiful book there. It was from Vienna, 1900, with half of it in Hebrew, half in German. I told him I had the feeling it came out of early Reform Judaism with the introduction of the vernacular. He said I should look at it, and I said I would. We parted, never even having exchanged names, and Jeffrey and I finished our shopping, went to our car across the street, and walked over to the antique store. Just before going in, the complete stranger came out with the most beautiful book in his hands, which he put in my hands, giving it to me. And I don't know if you can see, you can look after, but this is the book. The book's cover is what appears to be ivory with bronze or brass edging, with a design in the front representing the holy ark of a sanctuary, including the 2 tablets of the law. Except for one piece of the design and a latch that are missing, it's perfect, albeit fragile at this point. And it's my birthday, I realized, remembering that it was also the 86th anniversary of Kristallnacht. I couldn't read, I actually showed it to you upside down. I couldn't read the title in German, but the author's name, J.H. Mannheimer, sounded somewhat familiar to me, a Reformed theologian I seem to remember. I didn't grasp right away it was a prayer book. I opened the book to the first pages of real text and started trying to sound out the Hebrew letters. My grasp of Hebrew is very limited in spite of having studied biblical Hebrew grammar with the late Rabbi David M. Posner. So I looked at it and I went, "Ma," very tentatively, "tovu, ma tovu." And there on the sidewalk of Maingwen Street in Machynlleth, I started singing the hymn we heard this morning and we so often hear on a Saturday morning. Ma tovu, ma tovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenosecha Yisrael, ma tovu, ma tovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenosecha Yisrael. And if that wasn't enough, I then told the complete stranger who'd put this glorious book in my hands about Balak, the portion we and Jews all over the world read this morning, the portion we read each and every year, the portion leading up to those words and the hymn. I told him about the evil Balak hiring Balaam to curse the Israelites, of Balaam heading off to do so when the donkey he was riding saw the angel of God and kept refusing to go, going off course, of Balaam striking the ass repeatedly, then finally seeing the angel himself, and then blessing the Israelites he'd been hired to curse. How goodly are thy tents, O God of Jacob. It was when I went back to the car, got my camera, and took a few pictures of the complete stranger holding the book and asked for his address to send him copies, that we finally exchanged names. Andrew Law. His wife, Rebecca, and their son, Alexander, soon came over too. As an aside, towards the end of our stay, we saw a handwritten sign outside the Methodist Chapel in Talwyn that read, "This Sunday, Andy Law," and knew it was he, the no longer complete stranger. While we should have been packing, we went to the service, were greeted as we arrived by "my friends from New York," and heard him preach, reading biblical passages, speaking fittingly about kindness. But back to Mine Street with Andrew Law and his wife and son. Eventually we parted, and Jeffrey and I headed back to the farmhouse where we stay. As I remember it, we drove in silence, each of us marveling over what had happened, finding ourselves full of hope just when we needed it most. Then, still in silence, each of us wondered how that book had come to be in Machenkleff, of all places. And then each of us thought of Warren Zorek. Warren was, as our senior Rabbi Emeritus Ronald B. Sobel expressed it, one of the Lamed Vavniks, the 36 righteous people in the world at any given time. We knew him through sitting on the Community Concerns Committee with him. But we were relatively new to the congregation, and he'd made a difference in so many ways for years. He was a co-chairman of the Sunday lunch program, and in those days it was a sit-down meal with congregants preparing for the food and serving it. He worked on the second night Seder, served on the cemetery committee, and we don't know the half of what he did here at Emanu-El. He came to Emanu-El through his wife Jane, whose grandfather, Nathan Kraft, was the senior rabbi at Emanu-El when it was on 5th Avenue and 43rd Street. Jane used to say that her grandfather's sermons were so inspiring that more people came to Saturday morning services than could be accommodated, occasioning the need for a bigger sanctuary, leading to the move to 65th Street. Besides everything he did at Emanu-El and his work, Warren volunteered with the Red Cross. He and Jane were part of the Red Cross's Third Alarm Association, which set up canteens for firefighters at all hours of the day and night when there were blazes in the city, and found shelter for displaced tenants. He brought blood to hospitals for patients in dire need of it, arranged for blood and food and clothing and whatever else was needed during disasters throughout the country and in the world. In 1996, he was honored for his work for the Red Cross by relaying the Olympics torch as it headed down to Atlanta. A group of us went to the Bronx to witness and celebrate him. Here at Emanu-El, a plaque in the kitchen reads, "In loving memory of Warren W. Zorek, who served so many." But none of that is why Jeffrey and I each remembered him that day. We remembered him because one summer night in the mid-90s, a congregant who had served as an usher at Friday Shabbos services was wending his way from the Lowenstein Sanctuary to the community house when he fell and was taken by ambulance to New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center, now NYPH Weill Cornell. Jeffrey and I went over to the ER to be there for him when he left. After a while, Warren came too. As we sat together, we talked, and we must have told Warren about our going to Wales. And Warren told us he'd been in Wales during the war. He'd been in Llanidloes, a town we happened to know south of Machenkleff, at the other end of the mountain road. How had he wound up in Llanidloes? Then Warren told us about the Kindertransport, the program established after Kristallnacht to bring children from Nazi Germany and the Reich to sanctuary in Great Britain, providing care, education, and eventual emigration from Britain. Warren had been rescued by it. According to his daughter, Jennifer Zorek Pressman, he never spoke at home of his having been part of the Kindertransport. He did speak of having grown up in Gloucester, England, where he'd lived during the war, saying, "I thought it was a great adventure." She and her brother, Michael Zorek, have since retraced their father's steps, going to Gloucester and back to Wrocław, his early childhood home. All these years later, remembering Warren's telling us that night in the ER, putting the book I just received in context, figuring it had arrived in Machenskleth through the Kindertransport, gave the book even more beauty, more resonance to us than it had had initially. To think of parents parting from their beloved son or daughter, knowing it was next to impossible they would ever see each other again, wanting with every bone in their bodies that child to survive, wanting that child to look at that book and feel the love behind it, wanting that child to remember them, wanting that child to look at that book, that beautiful book, and grasp the faith for which his or her parents had died, wanting that child to follow that faith, to keep it alive as it had been kept alive through the years, not tens of years, not hundreds of years, but thousands of years, through Amalek after Amalek after Amalek. And there's a little worn, multicolored braided woolen cord, a bookmark in the book, a prayer book, a testament to its having been read over and over and over again. Ma tovu. How goodly are thy tents, O God of Jacob.